Unsolved mysteries have a way of lingering in our minds long after the headlines have faded. Some cases stand out not just because they remain unsolved, but because the questions they leave behind. Questions that haunt the investigators, the families, and the public. Few cases embody this more than the story of the boy in the box. In February of 1957, the body of a young boy was discovered in a cardboard box in a quiet part of Philadelphia. He was bruised, malnourished, and alone. Decades later, despite advances in technology and tireless efforts to uncover his identity, he remains a nameless symbol, one of America's most enduring mysteries. Who was this child? How did he end up there? And why has no one come forward to claim him? Even all these years later, the boy in the box has captivated the public's imagination and frustrated investigators for over 6 decades. It's a story of tragedy, heartbreak, and unanswered questions, but it's also a story of relentless determination to seek justice to a child the world forgot. In this video, we'll dive into the chilling details of the case, from the discovery of his body and the investigation that followed, to the theory, speculation, and modern efforts to solve this mystery. Along the way, we'll explore why this case continues to resonate so deeply with people, even after all this time. This is the story of the boy in the box. The story of the boy in the box begins on a cold February day in 1957. In a quiet wooded area of Fox Chase just outside of Philadelphia. The area, a patchwork of small roads, rural properties, and overgrown brush, was the kind of place that seemed untouched by time. Peaceful on the surface, but hiding secrets in its shadows. It was here, tucked away from the eyes of the bustling city, that a grim discovery would shatter that place forever. A young muscat trapper, out checking his traps in the woods, stumbled upon something that gave him pause. A large cardboard box, partially hidden in the undergrowth. At first glance, it might have seemed like rubbish left behind by someone passing through, but as he looked closer, he saw it was not just an ordinary box. Inside, wrapped in a thin flannel blanket, was the body of a young boy. The boy, who appeared to only be around between 4 and 6 years old. His small frame told a tragic story of neglect. His body was pale, bruised, and malnourished. His hair had been crudely cut, as though someone had rushed to alter his appearance. The box itself, which once held a bassinet, was old and battered, with faint markings which would later lead investigators to a nearby J.C. Penney store. But for the trapper, it wasn't just the box or the child that made the scene so haunting. It was the eerie silence of the woods, the feeling that he had uncovered something that no one was ever meant to find. Despite the shock of what he'd seen, the young man hesitated to report it. Some say he was afraid of drawing attention to his illegal animal traps, while others believed he simply didn't want to become involved in what was clearly a troubling situation. Days passed, and the boy's body remained in the woods, hidden and alone. It wasn't until another local man driving through the area spotted the box and alerted authorities finally. This man, unlike the trapper, felt compelled to act. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps he felt the weight of what he'd been left there. Either way, his call to the police set the wheels of the investigation finally into motion. When police finally arrived at the scene, there was little to go on. The box was damp from winter weather, and any footprints or other evidence had likely been washed away by rain or trampled on by passers-by. The boy's body, though tragic, gave no clear answers. His identity was a mystery, and there was no signs of who might have left him there, or why. The discovery of the boy in the box was just the beginning of what would become one of the most perplexing cases in American history. A child, abandoned and alone in a place where no one was supposed to find him, and yet someone did. The question now was, could anyone uncover the truth? When police arrived at the scene in Fox Chase, they were met with a mystery unlike any they had encountered before. The body of a young boy, malnourished, bruised, and alone, offered no immediate clues about his identity or how he ended up in a discarded cardboard box. With little to go on, Investigators knew they'd have to rely on meticulous detective work and a community willing to help. But as the days turned to weeks, it became clear this would be no ordinary investigation. The first step was to examine the box itself. It had once contained a bassinet sold by J.C. Penney, and investigators managed to track it to a store in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania. But this lead quickly went cold. Like so many boxes of its kind, it had been mass-produced and sold to countless customers. The blanket wrapped around the boy's body was similarly unhelpful. Though it was made of inexpensive material and bore a distinctive design, police were unable to trace its origins to a specific maker or location. Next, they turned their attention to the boy himself. Forensic experts estimated his age to be between 4 and 6 years old, based on his size and dental development. His body showed signs of neglect, he was underweight, his ribs were visible, and his skin bore multiple bruises. Yet there was also signs that someone had cared for him at least at some point. His nails had been trimmed, his hair had been recently cut, albeit roughly, and his body appeared to have been washed after death. The circumstances of his death, however, were unclear. There was no obvious fatal injuries, no gunshot wounds, and no clear signs of strangulation. It seems like he had died from a combination of abuse and neglect, though the exact cause remained undetermined. To this day, there is no official ruling on how the boy died. Police also considered the possibility that he might have been reported missing. They scoured local and national databases comparing his description to the records of missing children. Shockingly, no one came forward to claim this boy. This led to one of the most troubling aspects of the case. It wasn't just a boy that died under tragic circumstances, it was that no one seemed to miss him. He had no name, no history, no one was searching for him. Desperate for answers, the investigators turned to the public. Flyers bearing the boy's likeness were distributed widely across Philadelphia and the neighbouring states. His post-mortem photograph, where his face was painstakingly reconstructed to look as lifelike as possible, was sent out in the hope that anyone might recognise him. It was a bold and controversial move, but it also yielded no solid results. Detectives also looked into the area in which the boy was found. Fox Chase, though rural, was not completely isolated. They questioned residents, combed through property records, and even consulted local hospitals and orphanages. But again, no one seemed to have any knowledge of a missing boy that matched that description. As the months dragged on, the investigation began to stall. Leads dried up, and the case slipped from the front pages. For the police, it was a bitter pill to swallow. They had done everything they could think of, tracked the box, analysed the blanket, publicised the case, but nothing had worked. The boy remained unidentified and his story untold. The investigation into the boy in the box is a stark reminder of how difficult it can be to solve a case with so little to go on. Despite their best efforts, detectives found themselves at a standstill, unable to bring justice to the child they had come to know only through tragedy. And yet, even as the investigation grew colder, the determination to uncover his identity never wavered. With no name, no family, and no clear leads, the boy in the box became a blank slate onto which theories and speculation were projected. Over the decades, many have tried to piece together the fragments of his story, creating a tapestry of possibilities, some plausible, others far-fetched, but all united by one goal: to uncover the truth. One of the earliest theories suggested that the boy might have come from a local orphanage or foster home. His malnourished condition and bruises led some to suspect that he had been the victim of prolonged abuse, perhaps at the hands of a caregiver or institution. Detectives investigated nearby orphanages and homes for troubled children, but no record matched the boy's description. If he lived in such a place, it seemed that any trace of him had been lost to time. Another theory posits that the boy was never meant to be found at all. Some believed he was the child of unwed parents, a secret shame hidden away from the world. In 1957, the stigma surrounding illegitimacy was much stronger than it is today, and it's possible his death, whether accidental or otherwise, was seen as something to cover up. The hurried haircut, the attempt to clean the body, and the choice of such a remote location to dispose of him could all point to that kind of scenario. There's also the possibility that he was trafficked or exploited in some way. His malnourished and bruised state suggests prolonged mistreatment, and some have theorized he may have been sold or traded into an abusive situation. However, like many aspects of the case, there's little evidence to confirm or disprove this idea. Perhaps the most infamous theory emerged decades later in the form of a woman only identified as Martha. Martha claimed that the boy had been purchased by her abusive mother as a replacement child after the family suffered a miscarriage. According to her story, the boy had been physically and emotionally abused until he succumbed to his injuries. While this account captured public interest, authorities were unable to verify any of the details. Many dismissed it as fabrication, but for some, it remains a compelling possibility. Not all theories are so sinister. Some suggest the boy's death could have been accidental. Perhaps he suffered an injury, or his malnourishment led to a fatal illness. Out of fear or guilt, his guardians might have decided to hide the truth, leaving his body in the box in the woods. But even this more innocent explanation raises troubling questions. Why wouldn't they come forward, even anonymously, to give this boy his name back? Of course, there are those who argue that we will never know the full truth. The lack of evidence, the passage of time, and the anonymity surrounding the boy's life makes this case a puzzle with missing pieces. For every theory, there are unanswered questions. Why was his body so carefully cleaned, yet his hair so hastily cut? Why was he left at a location where he could be found, yet with no clues to his identity? In the end, the theories surrounding the boy in the box reveal more about our need to make sense of a tragedy than they do about the boy himself. Each possibility is a story we create to fill the void left by his silence. And though the truth remains elusive, the search for it speaks volumes about our humanity. As decades passed, the boy in the box case grew colder, but it never faded completely. Investigators, amateur sleuths, and true crime enthusiasts alike continued to search for answers. And with the advent of new forensic technologies, hope began to flicker once again. Could science succeed where traditional investigation had failed? One of the first major breakthroughs came in 1998, when the boy's body was exhumed for the first time. At the time, DNA testing was still in its early stages, but investigators were able to exact a sample and preserve it for future use. Though no immediate matches were found, this small step laid the groundwork for the case's modern advancements. In 2001, the Vidocq Society of Pennsylvania, a prestigious group of forensic experts and criminologists, took on the case. Their fresh perspective and expertise breathed a new life into the investigation. But even they were smited by the lack of physical evidence. However, their involvement helped keep the case in the public eye, ensuring that it wouldn't slip into obscurity. Another significant development came with the rise of isotopic analysis. By studying the chemical composition of the boy's hair and teeth, researchers could determine clues about his diet and the regions where he had lived. The analysis suggested that the boy had spent most of his time in the northeastern United States, possibly near Philadelphia, but the results weren't conclusive enough to pinpoint his identity. It wasn't until the 2010s that DNA testing took a massive leap forward, thanks to the growing field of genetic genealogy. Using publicly available DNA databases, researchers began matching identified remains to distant relatives, creating family trees that could lead to identification. This method has cracked cold cases across the world, including the infamous Golden State Killer. In 2019, the boy's remains were exhumed once again to extract a more complete DNA profile. Hopes were high that the genetic genealogy might solve the case of this decades-old mystery. But even with the advances in technology, the boy in the box case remains a unique challenge. His DNA, while preserved, didn't immediately yield any close familial matches. The process of tracing distant relatives is painstaking, requiring hours of genealogical research and the cooperation of living family members who may have no knowledge of the boy or his tragic story. Still, experts are optimistic that the time and technology are on our side. Every year, new advances bring us closer to uncovering his identity. Beyond just a science lab, the internet has played a key role in keeping the boy in the box case alive. Communities dedicated to unsolving mysteries have pooled resources, shared information, and re-examined old evidence with fresh eyes. In some cases, these armchair detectives have uncovered details that even the law enforcement overlooked. The collaborative nature of how the internet has transformed cold cases like this, proving that the search for answers can unite people around the globe. Today, the boy in the box is no longer just a tragic mystery from the past. He represents the future of forensic science and the enduring human need to seek justice for the voiceless. With every breakthrough, no matter how small, we come closer to giving him the one thing that he was denied for so long: a name. The Boy in the Box case is more than a tragic mystery. It's a haunting reminder of the countless voiceless victims who slipped through the cracks of society. For over 6 decades, his story has captivated investigators, true crime enthusiasts, and everyday people alike, becoming a symbol of the relentless pursuit of justice. In Philadelphia, where his body was discovered, the Boy in the Box has become part of the city's history. His burial site at Ivy Hill Cemetery serves as a place of remembrance for those who have been touched by his story. His headstone reads simply, "America's Unknown Child," a poignant reminder of his anonymity and the many lives his cases have impacted. In 1988, when his remains were first exhumed for DNA testing, the cemetery offered a free plot, ensuring that he would rest in a dignified place surrounded by flowers and tributes left by strangers. But the legacy of this case extends beyond Philadelphia. It highlights the advancements in forensic science, from early fingerprinting methods to modern techniques of genetic genealogy. The Boy in the Box was one of the first cases to draw widespread public attention to the potential of forensic investigators, serving as an early example of how science can give a voice to the voiceless. This case also inspired conversations about child welfare and the societal safety nets that fail to protect vulnerable children. How could a young boy, likely abused and neglected for much of his life, slip through the cracks without anyone noticing? His story serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and advocacy for at-risk children. And then there's the role of the internet. In the digital age, the Boy in the Box has found a new generation of advocates. Online forums, social media, and true crime websites have ensured that his case remains in the public eye. Amateur sleuths have created detailed timelines, compared DNA results, and even crowdsourced funding for advancements in forensic testing. While some may question the effectiveness of these efforts, the persistence of those communities proves that this boy has never been forgotten. At its heart, the Boy in the Box case reminds us of our shared humanity. Though he remains nameless, his story has resonated across generations and borders. He has become a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of the resilience of those who seek the truth and justice in the face of an unimaginable loss. His case may not have yet a resolution, but his legacy is undeniable. The Boy in the Box continues to teach us about the value of compassion, the importance of remembrance, and the unrelenting power of hope. And perhaps one day, when science and determination finally reveals his name, the world will be ready to give him the recognition he always deserved. After delving into the case, I found myself struck by the sheer weight of unanswered questions. The Boy in the Box isn't just a mystery, it's a symbol of how someone could be forgotten, erased almost entirely, except for the physical evidence of their tragic end. And yet, even in anonymity, this boy has managed to leave an unindelible mark on all of us. What stands out the most is the contrast in his story. On one hand, there's the horror of his death, the neglect, the abuse, and the fact that no one came forward to claim him. But on the other, there's an enduring compassion of complete strangers. People who never knew this boy have fought tirelessly to give him back his identity, to make sure he isn't forgotten. Now that's powerful. For me, the Boy in the Box represents something universal, a shared responsibility to care for the most vulnerable among us. His life and his death speak to the failures of a society that could not protect him. It's a sobering reminder that even now, there are children slipping through the cracks, facing neglect and abuse in silence. That's why this case matters, not just as a historical curiosity, but as a call to action. I also think this case reveals something about us as a culture. The fact that it has captivated generations says so much about our need for closure and justice. We're drawn to stories like this because they remind us of the fragility of life and the importance of remembrance. It's always easy to feel helpless when faced with a case like this, but the ongoing efforts to identify him shows that even the smallest actions, sharing a story, funding a DNA test, or simply keeping his memory alive, makes all the difference. What I hope people take away from this case is not the tragedy of the boy's life, but the resilience of those who refuse to let him disappear completely. The Boy in the Box is more than just a cold case. He's a reminder of the power of human compassion. And though we may never know the full story, the determination to uncover his identity shows that he has not been forgotten, that someone, somewhere, cares. In the end, what gives me hope is the progress we've made. Advances in technology, the dedication of investigators, and the collective efforts of online communities all point to the possibility that we may one day solve this mystery. And when the day comes, it'll be a testament to the power of persistence, empathy, and the belief that every life, no matter how short or tragic, deserves to be remembered. In a remarkable turn of events, this once unsolvable case has taken an extraordinary step forward. In December of 2022, after 65 years of uncertainty, authorities identified the boy in the box. His name is Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Using advanced genetic genealogy, investigators traced his DNA to surviving relatives, finally giving back his name after decades of silence. Joseph was just 4 years old when his life was tragically cut short. He was born on the 13th of January 1953 to a family in West Philadelphia. While details about his life still remain scarce, his identification marks a monumental achievement in forensic science and a testament to the tireless dedication of those who refuse to let his stories fade away. For many, this revelation, however, is bittersweet. Knowing his name brings a sense of closure, but it also underscores the pain and injustice he endured in his short life. Questions about who was responsible for his death and why still linger, but the major breakthrough, that is renewed hope, is that answers may follow. Joseph's identification is more than just a scientific triumph. It's a victory for human compassion. It shows that no matter how much time passes, no one deserves to be forgotten. Joseph Zarelli is no longer America's unknown child. He's remembered, honoured and loved by strangers and people all across the world. This case reminds us that persistence and innovation can illuminate even the darkest corners of history, and now Joseph's story can be told. And not just a mystery, but a call to continue to seek justice for those who need it the most.